My name is Leona Briggs, and I am 39 years old. For 31 of those years, my family called me the slow one, and I let them because letting them was cheaper than explaining the truth to people who had already made up their minds. I run a 3-bay hydraulic repair yard outside Wabash, Indiana. I rebuild cylinders. I reseal pumps. I repair the kinds of things that only matter after they stop lifting, pushing, turning, or holding. I know what steel sounds like when it is failing. I know what heat does to a rod under strain. I know the smell of burnt fluid before the pressure gauge twitches. I have never once read a legal document out loud in front of another human being. On the second Saturday in September, my family held its annual reunion in the fellowship hall behind Oak Run Community Church, and my father stood up at the front of the room with a wireless microphone and told 58 people that I had spent my whole life taking the long way around simple things. They laughed. Not hard. Not cruel. The polite kind of laugh. The kind that happens because the oldest man in the room has spoken, and everybody else has already learned the shape of their part. My 10-year-old nephew was sitting close enough to hear every word of it. 18 minutes later, a man in a navy suit came through the side door carrying a leather case and placed a cashier's check for $39 million in my hands, and the whole room stopped moving. That is the part everybody wants to hear about. It is not the part that matters. What matters is what my father tried to put in front of me after the check landed, and what my nephew asked me in the kitchen while the coffee burned itself into tar. That is the part one still have to stop for. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge. This is where we sit with the people a family decided about early and then never updated. If this kind of story finds you for a reason, drop a comment, subscribe, and stay with me because this one was never really about money. It was about paperwork, names, and what happens when a child gets labeled by a room before she is old enough to defend herself. Mondays at my yard start at 6:45, and Mondays are for dispatch. Earl Sutton unfolds the metal chair by the tool cage, lowers himself into it like a man negotiating with his knees, and reads the weekend messages out loud while I sort seals and check parts numbers. Earl is 63. He drove tow trucks for 27 years before his shoulder gave up, and I hired him for the front end. He has a voice like a county fair announcer who has seen everything twice and is bored by none of it. Flat. Steady. Never hurried. Voicemail from Renshaw Farms. Loader cylinder blew on Saturday. Text from Elkins Excavating. Wants quote on 2 rebuilt swing motors. Invoice from Midstate Fluid, $1,480, due Thursday. County Highway Department asking if we can turn a plow unit by Wednesday. I do not write any of it down while he talks. By the time Earl sets the last paper on my bench, I can tell you every number he said and the order he said it in, because that is what my head does instead of the other thing. Caleb Morrow, who has worked for me 5 years and thinks he is subtler than he is, believes Earl and I are just old-fashioned. Caleb is 32 and has very strong opinions about efficiency, most of which arrived in his life after YouTube did. Caleb has no idea that in 15 years at that address, I have not once opened a bank letter by myself without first knowing what it was going to cost me in private. There is a system. The system is why the yard is still standing. And the system, until last fall, had exactly one moving part, and that part was a 63-year-old man in a folding chair who never once asked me why Monday messages had to be read before I touched them. That August, we got one last ordinary Monday. The kind where nothing in the stack mattered enough to say twice, and I had no reason to remember that by Thursday my life was going to divide neatly into before and after. Before I get to the envelope, I have to tell you about the phone call because the phone call came first and set the clock running. My mother, Donna, calls the yard line instead of my cell because she says cell phones make people sound temporary. She told me the reunion date was set. Second Saturday in September. Fellowship Hall. 4 o'clock. Everybody bringing something they were proud of. That is a real thing in my family. There is a long folding table by the front door for it. My brother Gavin puts his plaques there. He is a financial advisor in Fort Wayne and has certificates for things nobody in the room actually understands, but everyone respects because they are framed. My sister Meredith puts school district recognition photos there because she is principal of a middle school and the state gave her a banner 3 years ago, and now that banner has more miles than some people's marriages. cousins bring military commission letters, real estate awards, diplomas, newspaper clippings, and one year my aunt brought a pie ribbon from the county fair and left it there like it was war memorabilia. Then my mother said the kind thing. She said, "Honey, you don't have to worry about the pride table. Just bring rolls." She said it softly, generously, the way you tuck a blanket around somebody you do not expect to withstand weather. There was no cruelty in it. That is what people never understand. Cruelty would have been easier to name. What there was instead was a scoreboard everybody accepted and a family so practiced at its own hierarchy that nobody heard the insult anymore. There were achievers. There were presenters. There were people whose names got followed by facts. And then there was me, dependable enough to bring bread, harmless enough not to complicate the picture. I told her I would bring rolls. I hung up and stood there with my hand still on the receiver, doing what I have done most of my life in the first 5 seconds after something hurts me, which is absolutely nothing. In the fall of 1995, I was 8 years old and in 3rd grade, and my teacher was a woman named Mrs. Barlow, who wore navy cardigans even in warm weather and kept sharpened pencils in a coffee mug from Gatlinburg. She asked my parents to come in after school. I sat in the hallway with my sneakers not touching the floor and listened through a door that had not been fully latched. Mrs. Barlow said I was bright. She said it twice. She said I could solve mechanical puzzles in my head faster than anyone in the class. She said I could build from diagrams. She said if she showed me how something moved once, I did not forget it. She said when she read directions out loud in a group, I lost steps. She said when she asked me questions directly, I took too long to answer. She said she thought I needed to be evaluated for an auditory processing disorder. There was a pause. Then my father said the sentence that sat in the middle of my life for the next 31 years. He said very calmly, "She just takes longer. Somebody has to wait on her, that's all." My mother said, "That's true." Mrs. Barlow tried again. She said support early matters. She said records can help teachers understand. My father asked whether the evaluation would follow me. Mrs. Barlow said yes, there would be documentation. My father said no. The folder closed. Nobody mentioned it again. The next night at dinner, my brother Gavin, who is 13 and had already figured out that a well-timed joke can buy a child power, asked if somebody should give the slow one the potatoes first so I could catch up. Everybody laughed. My father did not stop him. That was the day the name got issued. 31 years later, that same man would stand in a fellowship hall and hand it back to me gift-wrapped as family humor. My sister Meredith called me the first week of August, and she never calls without purpose. Meredith is 43 and has the exact voice you would expect from a woman who has spent 19 years saying, "Let's bring it down," to rooms full of adults with graduate degrees. Her son Owen's teacher had sent home a recommendation for testing. Meredith had not signed it. She had her reasons ready. She gave them to me in one breath, like a speech she had rehearsed in the car. She said labels stick. She said files follow kids. She said a code entered at age 10 gets read by people who have never met the child and still gets to decide things about him. She said Owen was thoughtful, not delayed. She said boys mature unevenly. She said she had watched schools build pathways around paperwork instead of children, and she was not going to let that machine get its hands on her son. Then she said, "You, of all people, should understand what I'm trying to protect him from." I stood in bay, too, with hydraulic fluid drying on my forearms, and said nothing for long enough that she thought I was agreeing. The thing is, Meredith is not cruel. She is not stupid. Every word she said came from love and fear in equal measure. Every word she said was also the exact same machine that had been running on me since 1995, only now it wore district credentials and used nicer nouns. She waited for me to say yes. I said I had a customer waiting. She said, "So you do agree?" And I said, "I have a customer waiting," and hung up. There is an old grain elevator on Market Street with 2 boarded windows and a faded painted sign that still says Briggs Feed and Mill. My grandfather put that sign up in 1969. My father ran the place from the early 80s until the bank locked the side gate in 2010. Nobody has touched it since because Wabash County has enough empty square footage already and no one is in the market for 14,000 feet of memory with a leaking roof. I drive by it sometimes after parts runs and kill the engine across the street. I know the slope of the roofline. I know the concrete in the rear annex is still sound because I went in through a broken service door with a flashlight 5 years ago and checked. I know what the electrical service would take to bring it back. I know where I would put the compressor room. I know exactly what font I would use if I ever had my name painted under my grandfather's. There has been a number in a coffee tin under my winter sweater since I was 33, and the number has not once been for a vacation, a bigger truck, or a nicer apartment. It has been for that building. I have never said that to another living person. Not to Earl. Not to Caleb. Not once. In my family, the fastest way to lose a thing is to let people know you want it. That August, a commercial realtor sign went up in the front window of the mill, and I drove past it 4 times in 1 week. On the 4th pass, I pulled over so hard my socket set slid under the passenger seat. I was 23 when the bank took my father's business. I was working nights at a farm equipment manufacturer then, and sleeping half my life away, and did not understand what I was watching until it had already become history. Here is what I remember. A man from the bank sat at our kitchen table on a March afternoon in a pressed shirt with a folder open in front of him. My father sat with both hands flat on the oilcloth and asked him to explain 1 paragraph. The banker explained it. My father asked again. The banker explained it again, slower this time. My father asked a 3rd time, and his ears turned red all the way to the tips. Then he signed. That was it. That was the whole moment. No shouting. No fighting. No dramatic threat. Just a room full of paper and a man who decided asking a 4th time would cost more than whatever was on the line. By autumn, there was a chain on the gate at the mill and a notice wired to it at eye level. My father never spoke about that day again. What he did instead was start reading everything out loud. Farm reports, seed catalogs, medication inserts, tax envelopes, warranty cards. Once, the entire back panel of a can of peaches to my mother while she was washing dishes and had not asked a single question. If you had walked in, you might have thought he was showing off. He was not showing off. He was standing guard against a thing that had already gotten inside. Now the envelope. It came by certified delivery, which meant I had to sign on a glass screen with a man waiting at my shop door while pretending to be a person who does that kind of thing every day. Signing my name, I can do. My name comes out of my hand without having to pass through the part of my brain that tangles. The return address was from a law office in Indianapolis. I knew the firm because they had represented Great Lakes Motion Systems since 2020, and every piece of paper from them had, until that Thursday, been read to me on a Monday by Earl in a folding chair. Only this was a Thursday. Earl was home with bronchitis. I carried the envelope to my truck, laid it on the passenger seat, picked it back up, set it on the bench in Bay 1 under the bright light, squared it against the edge, and went to finish a pump housing I had already pulled apart. I want to be honest about this because it is the exact shape of my life. I was not afraid of what was inside. I was afraid of what opening it alone was going to cost me in private. It sat on that bench for 4 days. It was, I would later find out, the most expensive envelope in northern Indiana. Monday came. Earl dragged in, coughed twice, got his coffee, read through the usual stack, and then picked up the certified envelope and slit it with a pocket knife he has carried since Reagan was in office. About halfway down page 1, his voice changed. He stopped. Started over. Read slower. What the letter said was that Great Lakes Motion Systems was exercising the purchase option on the remaining royalty term under our 2020 licensing agreement. What it said was that after sales audits, underreporting adjustments, and valuation of the remaining term through patent expiration, the total settlement number was $39 million even. What it said at the bottom, in a sentence with no drama in it at all, was that closing was set for Saturday, September 14th at 4:30 p.m. and payment would be delivered at execution. Earl put the paper down on his knee. Caleb was in Bay 3 running a pressure test and could not hear any of it. I was standing there holding a rag black with old fluid, and the only thing I asked was, "Read me the date again." He read it again. Saturday, 4:30. The same Saturday, my family would be in a fellowship hall, lined up around a table of framed proof. I did not say any of that out loud. I took the paper back, folded it, set it down square, and went right back to work on the housing like it was an ordinary Monday in Indiana and not the beginning of the strangest week of my life. You should know where the money came from because people later decided it must have been luck. It was not luck. In 2016, I lost my biggest customer. They rebuilt mini excavators, and my valve assemblies were failing under load because operators were having to feather controls around pressure lag that should never have existed in the first place. The factory blamed users. Users blamed maintenance. Everybody blamed everybody except the design. I came in on a Friday, closed the bay doors, and spent 11 nights in a row drawing fluid pathways on the concrete wall in the back room with a yellow paint stick. No words. Never words. Words are where my eyes trip. Arrows. Chambers. Flow paths. Pressure differentials. A spool that could self-balance instead of fighting the operator. I drew it 37 times. Maybe 40. By the end of the second week, my hands were stained yellow, and my apartment above the yard smelled like coffee, brake cleaner, and neglect. The fix ended up being plain enough to embarrass better-funded men. A compensating bypass with a pressure equalizing seat that let the system correct itself before the operator could over-adjust. The machine stopped arguing with the hand, controlling it. That was the whole idea. I built the prototype out of scrap stock on a Sunday. By Tuesday, the lag was gone. By Friday, the customer I had lost was back in my lot. In 2020, Great Lakes came to buy it. They gave me two choices. Take $2 million cash and walk away. Or take $400,000 at signing and a royalty percentage tied to every unit sold until the patent expired. My attorney read both options to me over 2 evenings in her office in Indianapolis. Then I sat in my truck under a parking garage light for almost an hour thinking about excavator fleets, municipal contracts, rental markets, and how many compact machines were going to be sold in the next 15 years. I took the royalty. I did not tell my family. My brother Gavin found out anyway because Gavin knows a man in every room he should not know a man in. He brought it up at Sunday dinner like a casserole. He did the math out loud with a pen on a napkin. He explained percentages to me in a tone that sounded helpful and felt like being patted on the head. He said, "Lee, you turned down guaranteed money because you didn't understand the paper." My mother said, "Gavin." My father said nothing, which in our house was a vote. Inside a week, every person related to me knew I had passed on real money for a deal too complicated for me to read. For 4 years after that, every holiday somebody found a way to mention the $2 million. Nobody ever asked me what the design actually did. My father came by the yard the Thursday before the reunion to borrow my battery charger, which he does twice a year and could replace for less than dinner, but never will. He is 72. He still buttons his work shirt all the way to the throat even in warm weather. His hands look like they were built to hold cast iron. While he was there, a contractor named Brian Kessler stopped in asking for a quote on a dump trailer hoist rebuild. Brian asked me for the number. Before I could answer, my father took the estimate sheet off my bench, looked it over, and read the number out himself. It was my number. I had calculated it in my head from time, seals, bore condition, travel, and labor. Brian shook my father's hand before he shook mine. Then my father thanked me for the charger and went out to his truck, and as he leaned in, I saw a blue folder in the passenger door pocket with little flags sticking off the top. I did not ask. In our family, you learn early that asking a direct question is how you get taught your place. If somebody has ever answered for you while you were standing there breathing the same air, then you know exactly what that sounds like. Stay with me, because it gets worse before it gets honest. I went to see the broker about the mill on the third Friday in August. Her name was Janet Boyle, and her office was above a print shop with a window unit that dripped into a 5-gallon bucket. I had my system ready. My system is this. I ask for the packet, I take it home, and I sit with it at my kitchen table for 2 nights with a straight edge under the lines until by the 3rd pass, I understand what I am looking at. I have bought trucks this way. I bought my 60-ton press that way. Time is the price I pay for precision. So I said what I always say. Can I take the paperwork home and look it over? Janet winced before she answered. There was another offer on the mill as of Wednesday. Buyer from out of county. Wants it for storage units. Seller wanted signatures by Monday. Then she slid the purchase agreement across the desk and set a pen on top of it. There was traffic below us on Main Street. The air conditioner dripped into its bucket. Somewhere downstairs a laminator was whining. I sat there and looked at the page, and the letters did what they do when I am tired and watched and under time. They did not blur. People always say blur, but that is not right. They traded places. Held still until I focused, then two of them shifted, and the sentence I had just built collapsed, and I had to start at the left edge again. Janet folded her hands and waited. So I signed my name on a page I could not properly read in a room where everybody else thought that was a normal thing a grown woman ought to be able to do. Then I drove back to the yard and sat in the truck for 12 minutes before I could make myself get out. Owen comes by the yard most Thursdays because Meredith's meetings run late and my mother is too far out of town to be practical on school nights. He is 10 years old and one of the quietest children I have ever met, which is saying something. He sits on an overturned crate by the bench with his backpack between his shoes and watches machinery like it owes him an explanation. The Thursday after I signed at Janet's office, he came in, unzipped his backpack for a snack, and a paper slipped halfway out with red marks all over it.
He saw me see it.
He pushed it back down carefully, flattening it along the side of the bag with 2 fingers, so it would not crinkle. I know that motion. I invented that motion on a school bus in 1995. There is a specific way a child hides paper, when the sound matters as much as the sight. I did not mention it. Not because I am wise. Because I could not think of a single sentence that would not make him feel caught. So instead I asked if he wanted to help me sort fittings. He said yes, so fast he knocked the crate over. I set him up at the hardware bench and let him group couplers by thread and diameter while I watched from the next station. He smiled the whole time. When Meredith texted she was 10 minutes out, he zipped his bag and stood by the door like none of it had happened. He was already better at hiding than I had been. The next Thursday, I did something I had never done with another child in my life. I took him into the back room and turned on the overhead lights. It takes the last row a few seconds to fully catch, so he got the wall in stages. 10 years of yellow and white paint marker on concrete block. Flow paths. Valve bodies. Mounting plates. Hose routing. A service cart redesign. 3 versions of a bracket I never built. Pressure maps. Side views. Cross sections. Not a single word. Not a label. Not my initials. I had built myself a room with no language traps in it. Owen stood in the middle of the floor and stared. Then he said, "You did all of this?" I said, "I did." He said, "Where are the notes?" I said, "There aren't any." Then I handed him a paint marker and said the only useful sentence I have ever given a child. If writing jams up, draw it first. He stood there for maybe half a minute, long enough that I started regretting it. Then he walked to the lower left side where he could reach and drew, in under 10 minutes, a gate latch assembly for the livestock trailer his mother had complained about the week before. Side view. Swing direction. Pivot placement. He put the clearances exactly where they needed to be. It was correct. I did not correct a line of it. Behind me, the door opened and Meredith came in. We had the fight in the gravel lot with the back room door shut and Owen still inside with the marker in his hand. Meredith did not raise her voice. Principals do not have to. She said, "What is this?" I said, "A wall." She said, "Leona, do not teach him how to dodge it." I said, "I taught him how to get through it." Then Meredith said something I still think about every week. She said, "You get to be almost 40 in a county where everybody knows you and nobody makes you fill out forms in front of strangers. My son is going to be in rooms full of people who do not know him and only know what is on paper. If I let them code him at 10, he carries that for the next 12 years." She was crying by the end of it, standing upright in a gravel lot with bushels of late summer dust on her shoes and not wiping her face. I want to be fair here, because fairness is the only reason any of this makes sense. My sister was not trying to hurt her son. She was trying to spare him. My father thought he was sparing me too. That is the real trap. Good intentions can build the same cage bad intentions would have, only quieter. The Tuesday before the reunion, Earl got through the dispatch stack and then did not stand back up. He sat in that folding chair with both hands on his knees and told me his daughter in Tucson had found a place with a detached casita and a dry climate and wanted him there by winter. He said he had already talked to a man from church who could come in Mondays and handle the reading. I said no. He said, Lee. I said, no, Earl. And thank you. Here is what I could not tell him. It had taken me 14 years to let one man read my business life aloud to me without my shoulders locking. 14 years to stop pretending I was busy while he did it. 14 years to let one person know the shape of my delays without feeling stripped. I did not have another 14 years to start over with a church volunteer. And the thought of some well-meaning stranger learning the exact places where my timing failed made me want to go shut myself in the parts room until harvest. So I said we would figure it out. He let it go because Earl has always known where my pride lives and has never kicked it. That same week, Earl took 2 days off to visit family. A vendor email came in with a rush parts order. I told myself I was a grown woman with a business and could sort one order alone. It was one line, one material code. I read 4,140 as 4160 and ordered a shipment of the wrong stock. It sat in my yard by Thursday afternoon under a tarp I already knew would not help. It cost me nearly $7,000, and a customer I had needed. Caleb helped unload it. He looked at the tags, looked at me, and said nothing all day. I would almost have preferred him saying something. That night I sat on the outside stairs to my apartment over the office and did the thing I need you to understand. I did not think I need help. I thought I need this not to be visible ever again. Then I went inside and called the banker's office and told them that if they wanted my signature on Saturday, they could bring the closing documents to Oak Run Church and find me there after 4. He said that would be fine. I told myself it was about timing. It was not about timing. The Oak Run Fellowship Hall has low tile ceilings, fluorescent lights, a coffee station that smells permanently of old filters, and one fan over the west windows that wobbles just enough to make you look up every 10 minutes. There were 58 people there, by my count. 3 long tables with green paper cloths taped to the corners. Ham, sandwiches, noodle casserole, deviled eggs, cookie trays, punch sweating in clear bowls. And by the door, on a table with a cloth of its own, the pride display. Gavin's certificates. Meredith's district banner photo. A cousin's EMT commendation. 2 diplomas in little black frames. They stood there in a row looking from the doorway like a neat little cemetery for people who needed proof they had existed correctly. I came in at 4:03 carrying yeast rolls in a foil pan and put them on the food table because that was the table I had been told to bring something to, and in 31 years I had never put a single object on the other one. My mother hugged me and said they smelled wonderful. Earl came in 10 minutes later in a pressed shirt with the fold line still in it because I had asked him to be there in case papers showed up, and he had said yes, without asking what kind. Caleb drove him. Caleb stood by the coat hooks with a plate in one hand and did not sit down once all evening. My father was near the coffee station talking to 2 men he used to do grain contracts with. When he saw me, he raised his chin 1 inch, which is his version of affection. Owen was sitting at the end of the pride table on a folding chair with both hands in his lap, not touching anything on it, looking at all of it like it might become a quiz. Somewhere on US 24, a banker in a navy suit was driving north with a check in a case, and I did not know that yet. I kept glancing at the side door every minute or so like a woman waiting on a verdict. At 4:22, my father tapped a spoon against his coffee cup and took the wireless microphone from the church cabinet by the kitchen pass-through. Everybody quieted because he is the oldest Briggs still living, and this is what men like him do. They gather rooms by standing up in them. He thanked everybody for coming. Talked about my grandfather. Talked about the old mill. Mentioned how the first reunion had been a cookout in 1994 with card tables in the side yard. Then he went down the line. Gavin, keeping half of Allen County financially responsible. Meredith, running a school of 700 kids. A cousin in the Air Force. Another cousin with her nursing degree. Then he got to me. He did not skip me. That matters. Being skipped would have been mercy. He looked over at me and smiled the same affectionate smile he has worn his whole life when saying things he believed were gentle because he had said them enough times. He said, "And Leona, well, Leona still likes to take the scenic route, but she keeps that yard afloat somehow. God bless her." And she brought the rolls.
The room laughed. Warm.
Brief. Reflexive. My mother laughed. Gavin laughed. Somebody said, "Ah, Glenn." At the end of the pride table, Owen did not laugh. He turned and looked at me and did not stop looking. And right then the side door opened. The man who came in was maybe 50, maybe a little younger, navy suit, leather case in his left hand, tie loosened half an inch from a long drive. He had the exact expression of a man who had spent 3 hours in construction traffic and decided at mile 90 that complaining would not improve the outcome. He stopped just inside the door and scanned the room. My father still had the microphone in his hand. The man said, "I'm looking for Leona Briggs." Every head turned. I said, "That's me."
He crossed
the room without looking at anyone else, shook my hand, introduced himself from Citizens Commercial, apologized for the venue in a tone that suggested he had delivered stranger things in stranger places, and set the case down on the corner of the food table next to my rolls. Then he opened it. Then he said the sentence people use when they have done the same extraordinary thing enough times that it has become ordinary to them. He said, "Ms. Briggs, this is the closing package for the royalty purchase under your 2020 licensing agreement. Escrow closes at 5. I need signatures here, and this is yours." Then he handed me the check. I have held a lot of objects in my life. This one weighed almost nothing. Cashier's check. Security thread. My name spelled correctly. $39 million. The number sat in the box like something from another person's story. Somebody's fork hit the floor. My father still had the microphone switched on and down at his side, and the sound he made when he saw the amount went softly through the speakers over the pride table for about 3 seconds. I stood in a church hall under bad fluorescent light with my family looking at me for the first time in years like I had crossed into a different species. It was the best moment of my life. Then the room came back on. Gavin got to me first and did what Gavin always does, which is arithmetic in the direction of other people's lives. He said it was gross, not net. He asked whether I understood tax exposure. He asked whether I had an estate plan. He asked whether I had any idea what people do wrong with sudden money. He was not being cruel. He was being useful in the only way he knows how, publicly, immediately, and at volume. My mother got there next and cried into my shoulder so hard I had to hold the check out to the side to keep from bending it. Phones came up. A cousin I had not heard from in years filmed the check. 2 men my father knew asked what the company was called. Someone asked if I was buying a lake house. Someone asked whether the yard was for sale. The banker stood at the corner of the food table with the signed closing pages under his hand and watched the room the way a man watches weather crossing open ground. Here is what I did not notice until later that night. Not one person in that hall asked me what I had built. Not one. They asked what I would do with the money, what I would lose to taxes, whether I would move, whether I would invest. Nobody asked what the design was. If your family has ever done math out loud about your life while skipping the part where you made it happen, put a 1 in the comments and stay with me because the next 15 minutes are the reason I am telling this story. My father waited until the noise crested and started to come down. Then he set the microphone on the table, went out to his truck, and came back in carrying the blue folder I had seen in his passenger door. Everybody made room for him, because everybody always makes room for a man who has spent 50 years training a town to part around him. He put the folder on the green paper tablecloth and opened it. Inside was a family trust draft and a power of attorney packet, tabbed and prepped and dated in July. Not that week. Not that day. July. The check in my hand was 15 minutes old. The paperwork was almost 2 months old. My father smoothed the first page with his palm and said, "Now before people start circling, somebody needs to make sure this doesn't get mishandled." He said the trust was simple. Said his name would be on it with mine just for protection. Said 2 signatures were better than 1 for a sum that size. Said family ought to handle family. Then he said the sentence into open air for the second time that day. He said, "She gets tangled with paper." Better it's somebody who knows her. 11 people nodded. My mother said, "That sounds wise." And in that moment the whole shape of it came together. He had known since summer that if money ever landed in my hands, he intended to catch it before I could close my fingers. Meredith got me by the elbow and took me into the hallway by the restrooms where the floor changes from tile to old linoleum. She was lit up in the face in a way I had never seen. Not greedy, not excited for herself, hopeful in a direction that made me feel sick. She said, "St. Anne's Academy in Fort Wayne. Small classes. No district file. No coding. He could start in January. They don't test kids the same way. He would never have to wear any of that." She meant Owen. She had the whole plan ready. Tuition, transportation, timing. She had clearly been carrying it around waiting for a world in which money removed the obstacle. She put her hand on my arm and said, "He will never have to be labeled. You, of all people, should want that for him." Down the hall through the open doorway, I could see my father's blue folder on the table. I could see Gavin explaining something with both hands. I could see my mother blotting her eyes. I could see Owen still sitting at the end of the pride table, hands in his lap, not touching one single framed thing in front of him. 30,000 a year to make sure nobody wrote anything down about him. It would work, too. That was the part that hollowed me out.
It would work for a while. For years maybe.
And then one day he would be a grown man in a room with a form he could not outcharm or outweight, and all the silence in the world would arrive with him. That was the first minute of the entire night I understood what my father had actually built. I went into the kitchen for 1 minute to get away from all of it. It is a narrow room with a pass-through window, a metal sink from another century, and 2 coffee urns that had been on so long the air smelled scorched. Owen was at the sink washing his hands with the water running. He had been washing them long enough that his knuckles were red. I turned the tap off for him. He kept his hands under the dry faucet. Then he asked me, without looking up, "Aunt Lee, are you actually the slow one?" He said it exactly like that. Not mean, not sad. He said it the way a kid asks whether a beam is load-bearing because he needs to know what kind of house he is standing inside before he decides where to step. I had an answer ready. I have had that answer ready for years. It goes like this. "No, honey, that's just a joke people in the family make.
Don't worry about it."
It is a smooth sentence.
Light.
Useful. It shuts the door without letting the child see the room behind it. I opened my mouth to say it and could hear the fellowship hall through the pass-through window. Silverware, chair legs, my brother's voice, the fan wobbling overhead. I thought about a pride table a 10-year-old would not touch.
And I could not say it.
I stood in a church kitchen smelling burnt coffee and did not answer a child for what felt like a very long time. Then I told him I would be right back. When I walked back into the hall, my father was standing at the center table with the blue folder open and a pen held out toward me. "Cap off, barrel first, the polite way." He said, "Come on, Lee. Let's get this handled tonight, so nobody has to worry." Then, one after another, 3 people offered me a soft exit. Earl stood up from his folding chair by the wall and said, "I can read it for you, boss. Take me 2 minutes." The banker said if I preferred, counsel could review summaries. My sister came in behind me and held out her hand for the folder and said, "Give it here. I'll tell you what matters." 3 doors. All of them warm. All of them offered by people who loved me. And every single one of them left my secret exactly where it had been sitting since 1995. My father waited with the pen. 58 people waited. I took the check from under my arm and laid it face down on the green paper cloth. Then I picked up the blue folder and said the only sentence I have ever said in that hall that I would happily say again. "Nobody reads for me tonight." Then I read it out loud. It took just under 5 minutes. If you have never sat through 5 minutes of honest effort in a silent room, I promise you it is longer than a speech and shorter than a life, and it is enough to show everybody who they have been. I got the title line on the second try. I lost a word 8 lines down and had to go back to the left margin and rebuild the sentence from the start. I did that more than once. I misread beneficiary and caught it. I hit fiduciary like a pothole and had to work through it piece by piece. My voice never lifted. That was the one thing I had. There is a sound a room makes when 58 people decide all at once not to move, and it is not silence. It is a fan motor, fluorescent hum, someone shifting weight, a cough that gets swallowed halfway through. At one point, somebody near the coffee station laughed once, small and nervous, then stopped because no one joined him. My mother looked at the table and kept looking there. Gavin took a step forward and said, "Lee, let me." And I said no without looking up. I said it in the same voice I use in the yard when a man is about to put his hand where hydraulics can take it off. He stopped. Earl sat back down. Owen came out of the kitchen and stood in the doorway with his hands still damp. I got to the third page. Everybody who deals with paper knows the third page is where the trap lives. That is where I found it. Signature authority on transfers. Co-trustee approval required for real property purchases. Distribution controls. Durable powers surviving incapacity. Language broad enough to let two men say they were protecting me while effectively holding the latch on every major move I made. Two names instead of one, exactly like my father said. He had not lied. He had only counted on no one in the room ever checking the working parts. I set the folder down square to the table edge because that is what my hands do when my head is holding a lot. Then I said the sentence. I said, "I have auditory processing disorder." Nobody moved. I said, "Mrs. Barlow asked to have me tested when I was 8, and my father said no because he was afraid paper would decide my life before I did." I said, "I have spent 31 years being called slow by people who mistook delay for deficiency." I said, "I made an appointment at the Adult Learning Clinic in Fort Wayne in June before any of you knew about any check because I was done letting rooms explain me to myself." I said, "My life is not a joke that got repeated too long. It is a condition that got named too late." Then I turned to Owen in the doorway and said, in front of every person we are related to, "Do you want me to go with your mom and you when they do the testing?" He said yes before I finished the sentence. He said it fast. He said it loud. It came out of him like something he had been carrying in his chest all summer. My sister stood up so fast her chair tipped backwards. My father did not shout. I have never heard that man shout in my life. What he does instead is lower his voice until everybody leans in. He said, quiet enough that only the first two tables really heard it. "All I have ever done is try to keep paper from taking things away." Then he reached into his shirt pocket and took out a folded document, soft and white at the creases from being opened and closed for years, and laid it next to my face-down check. I knew what it was before I touched it. The old loan modification. The one from 2010. The one he had signed after asking 3 times and deciding a 4th would expose him. He said, "That paper never asked how hard I worked." And I said, "I know it didn't." I meant it. I was not mocking him. He was right. Paper had hurt him. He had just built his whole religion around the wrong lesson. He had decided that if paper could wound a man, then nobody he loved should ever meet it alone. And, because fear does not know when to stop, protection had turned into control, so gradually he never heard the click. Then I said, "I'm still not signing it." He looked at me a long time, folded the old bank paperback along its own scars,
Picked up his cap,
said goodnight to my mother, and walked out through the side door into the parking lot without once looking back. I've gone over that moment 100 times, and I still do not believe he thought he had done anything wrong. Meredith came around the table, crying and furious at once, took Owen by the wrist and said, "You did that in front of my son." And I said, "Yes." Because there was no other answer left. She took him out to the lot. He looked back at me the whole way. After that, the hall emptied the way halls always do after something true happens, quickly, politely, in pairs. People shook my hand and congratulated me without holding eye contact. A cousin turned her phone face down. The banker got his executed closing pages and stayed longer than he had to, which I remember because decency from strangers is easier to notice than from blood. When most of the room was clear, he shook my hand and said, "Congratulations, Miss Briggs," like he meant the whole night, and not just the money. My mother put the lid on the rolls and set them next to my purse and touched my shoulder as she passed and said nothing at all. Then it was me and Earl and Caleb and a room still humming under fluorescent lights. So here is the accounting since my family likes arithmetic so much. That night I got my own voice in front of 58 people for the first time in my life. I got the kid. And it cost me my father, at least for a while, my sister for a month, and the only skill I had truly perfected up to that point, which was making sure nobody ever found out where the delay lived. The mill on Market Street closed in October. The out-of-county storage unit buyer withdrew the week he found out there was local cash competing, which remains one of the few genuinely funny things that happened all fall. I paid cash. The roof was worse than I had feared. The foundation was better. The new sign went up the first week of November. Briggs Feed and Mill, EST 1969. Reopened 2026. And underneath it, in smaller hand-painted letters added by a sign woman from Huntington who did not ask a single nosy question. Draw it first. Earl left for Arizona in late September. The folding chair is still by the tool cage. Nobody else sits in it. What I do now is this. Every Monday morning at 6:45, I take the first piece of mail myself. I read it out loud in Bay 1 with the overhead door open and Caleb leaning against the bench with his coffee. I get words wrong. I stop. I go back. If I need a second, I take it. If I need a line twice, I read it twice. Mondays, nobody reads for me. The clinic evaluation came back in November and said exactly what it had always been waiting to say. It did not fix me. There is no version of this where a woman walks into an office at 39 and walks out new. I still need more time than other people want me to need. I still hate crowded rooms with bad acoustics. I still build meaning slower when it comes at me live and fast. The difference now is not speed. The difference is who gets to name it. Meredith did not speak to me for 4 weeks. Then one Wednesday in October, she signed the consent forms and took Owen in for testing. She called me from the parking lot afterward. Neither of us apologized. What she said was, he asked me a question I couldn't answer. That was the whole phone call. It was enough. He has support now. And he comes to the mill on Saturdays. There is a section of clean painted block wall down low in the back room that belongs to him. He has filled 5 feet of it with trailer latch ideas, hose routing sketches, and one very convincing redesign of the latch on his mother's garden gate. My father did not call in October. He did not call in November. He did not come to Thanksgiving at my mother's, or maybe he did and I did not, which is more accurate and less dramatic. Then on a Monday morning in early December, I came down to the yard before sunrise and found a manila envelope on my workbench with no stamp and no note. Inside was the original deed abstract for the mill and 3 pages from my grandfather's maintenance ledger. He has a key to the side gate from the old days. I never asked for it back. I did not chase him down over the envelope. I did not throw it away either. It sits in the drawer under my bench with the clinic paperwork and the first royalty agreement, and some mornings I take it out and look at it and think about the fact that it is the only packet my father has ever handed me without reading it first. The Briggs family Christmas card still went out in December listing everybody's degrees and promotions and distinctions in tidy little lines. It probably always will. They were never completely wrong that someone needed to wait for me. They were only wrong about what that meant. It did not mean I was less. It meant I should have been given the time that belonged to me in the first place. That is my story. One reunion. One check I laid face down on a paper tablecloth. One old mill with a new sign. And one boy in a church kitchen who asked the right question before the adults in his life could bury it under kindness. If somebody in your family has been carrying a name since they were 8 years old, ask them about it this week with nobody else in the room. And if this reached you, send it to the person you thought about while you were listening. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.